Good evening and welcome to Solutionary TV. I am your host, Dr. Tatiana, and I am really pleased to direct this evening's segment to a recent and renewed fascination that we as a westernized society are beginning to turn inward and look at much more deeply through the realms of consciousness and through the understanding that there really is an epidemic in our current civilized society that has to do with dissociation and a moving away from the earth, moving away from the plants, the sentient life. And we're really looking to return the focus to native medicines, sacred plant ceremony, and what indigenous peoples have known since time immemorial and have not lost, as many of us have, looking for other solutions in our lives. We have a wonderful guest this evening who is an expert in this particular area of wealth of knowledge, and I would like to introduce him now. He is Jeff Firewalker Schmitt, and he comes with quite a lengthy repertoire of expertise in academia. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeff. Jeff did his undergraduate work at Wake Forest University, followed by graduate work at the University of Bath and Oxford University, gaining a doctorate in molecular biophysics. Jeff holds an adjunct professorships at both Wake Forest School of Medicine and Biochemistry, Physiology, Pharmacology as well. Until recently, he was the Director of Research for the Center of Integrative Medicine at Wake Forest. He is the founding member of numerous companies, including Targacept, Inc., where he led the development of simulation technology to make the process of drug discovery more efficient. Jeff has published over 100 peer-reviewed publications, patents, and abstracts, and been on the editorial advisory boards of 6 international journals. He's the founding research director of Bent Creek Institute of the University of North Carolina, and founded and directed the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative at Wake Forest School of Medicine. Jeff enthusiastically works with clients using sacred healing and counseling methods. One of his greatest joys is bringing people together in sacred community to facilitate personal and planetary healing. Jeff has enjoyed a decades-long relationship with the sacred healing plant tobacco and helped start a company to fight diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's based on this research. Over the years, his relationship has shifted to working with tobacco as a teacher and as a catalyst for sacred healing, and as a consequence was given the title Tabaquero, or one who heals with tobacco. That was a lengthy list of many talents, but thank you and welcome, Jeff Firewalker Schmitt. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening.
Tatiana, it's great to be here, and I look forward to a lively conversation. Thank you for the kind words.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you consider how much you have done in academia and trying to bridge these worlds of consciousness and spirit and healing the human-earth relationship at the level that you have, there almost is not anywhere near enough time in this hour. So we're just going to do the best that we can with getting our active viewers really up to date with how applicable merging all of these worlds are. It's such a beautiful thing to see medicine and academia merge with sacred wisdom and rights. And I know that your interest really got piqued. You shared in one of your TED Talks how you did go down to South America and decided to create an induction experience for yourself working with the locals. Perhaps you can just kind of start sharing how you were drawn from academia and into really needing to be experiential in that world so that they have a better background of your experience.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I think it's important to point out that I'm a Gemini, and so I've basically lived a double life. And until three and a half years ago, I was maintaining my academic and research posts, as well as this sort of secret life, or at least life that was secret to most of my research colleagues, in traditional folk medicine, mostly centered on the medicine ways of South America. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that I was so drawn to visit the Sequoia peoples in the northern Amazon was because they are reputed to have one of the most profound and deep understandings of the plant world and relationships to the plant world of anyone, any tribal group that's alive right now. The big surprise for me was their profound sophistication as a culture. I mean, they literally, Tatiana, brought me to my knees every day. I felt like, in so many ways, such a primitive human being, such a barbarian, and asked myself, um, how have we come so far from this place of profound balance, compassion, and joy in connection to the living world? It was quite a wonderfully, virtuously disruptive experience for me to understand just how differently people have lived on this planet. And these people, the Sequoias, are one of many tribal cultures on the earth now that live in, we refer to this as sacred reciprocity. Aini is the Quechua term that's used in the high mountains of the Andes, where they basically tend to elegantly the balance between themselves and the living world, themselves, their spirits, their psyches, and the spirit world. It's quite a thing to behold and experience.
Wow. And just to hear the way you describe that, the elegant simplicity of interweaving this holistic principle of sentient life, which is very much a body, mind, and spirit principle. It's very all-inclusive. Would you say that they've been able to maintain this, not only because culturally it's taught, and we know that our culture is so diverse with the various applications of materialistic science that has done away in the Western world almost completely with any elements of a spiritual component or a consciousness beyond density and mass component, but is it also because they practice the Sequoia, the art of sacred sacrament and plant medicine throughout the entire culture, not just within initiates or shamanism?
Well, so I think it has mostly to do with the fact that their worldview is completely different. In the Western world, as you mentioned, we are caught in this trap of materialism and social innovation, scientism. There's a large cross section of our culture that believes that we can basically solve all of humanity's problems through scientific and technical innovation. The Sequoia have a very different view of the individual as relates to the web of life. The cult of the individual, the sort of prime importance and self-centeredness that we see in the industrialized culture just is not present there. And indeed, they do use visionary plant medicines to access a broad range of non-ordinary states of consciousness that connect them to parts of the universe that we here in the industrialized world are largely cut off from. A vivid example of that is that with their culture and some of their neighboring cultures, and I think you can find this actually in pockets all through the Amazon, that using visionary plant medicines, the tribe can actually access a completely different strata of reality that we don't have access to, and that's where they actually do all of their learning. They don't actually sit down with one another like we do and teach in terms of normal tradition and transmission. They will imbibe these sacred sacraments, and part of their bioenergetic system will be completely conscious and aware in this other space-time.
Right.
And they even have a special form of sacred medicine that they feed their dogs, so they bring their dogs in and teach them how to hunt.
Wow.
This is why I felt so incredibly primitive hanging out with these people. I remember one night, it was like my third night there, one of the elders looked at the other and said, we haven't seen our friends in the third star system of the Pleiades in a while. I really miss them. Let's go see them tomorrow night.
Wow.
These guys knew more about the structure of the Milky Way galaxy than we did before Hubble.
Yes. Yes. And you know, it's exciting to me because the research that I do keeps me in touch with cutting edge science, or what I am told is cutting edge science as it's finally being revealed to the masses, which includes the fact that we live in a infinite degree of parallel universes, that we experience various levels of dimensionality as human beings and as sentient beings that can connect with other sentients that are not necessarily in what we would consider to be real matter or real form. I've seen recent publications go much more mainstream, that out of 100% of what is actually there, only 4.7% is what we would consider to be real matter or mass, which really leaves it wide open. A good 20+% is dark matter, and we know that a remaining 60 to 70%, depending on the quantum physicist that's reporting it, is dark space. And so when you consider how vast, how paramount it is to continue to be open and explore this interdimensionality and these parallel universes and these fields within fields that are natural as a state of being and living and learning to these indigenous peoples, it almost begs the question, how could we be living with anything less in civilized, industrial society, technologically advanced society? We've lost so much. Your personal experience going down there, I'm sure, just was hugely transformative. In your TED Talk, you did a great job of explaining how it just was an immediate shift for you when that sacred medicine was finally assimilated into your body. And if I understood correctly, was it Yahe? Because I really want to introduce our viewers to what some of these sacred medicines are that are often referred to as psychedelics, but when introduced in the right set and setting with the right intention and with some knowledge, end up becoming hugely expansive, healing, and ameliorative. So can you talk to our viewers a little bit about what these medicines are called, giving them full respect, and how they act within the sequoia and your personal experience?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, the sequoia refer to a admixture of two or more plants, principally two plants, the ayahuasca vine, and in this case a plant containing DMT called Chalipanga, as Yahe, and it's one of ayahuasca's many names. Ayahuasca refers also to the admixture of the ayahuasca vine with various other plant components that have a visionary affect, inducing non-ordinary states of consciousness, inducing the ability to connect to other orders and other experiences of the universe. I think if I were to convey one thing about these medicines is that they aren't objects. And one of the great risks that we run in diminishing their power and their sacredness here, as we Westerners begin to use them for our personal healing, is to treat them like objects, like tools.
Mm-hmm.
What I've come to understand as true is that these plants are actually sacred, ancient, intelligent beings. They have association with the physical plant itself under the right circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But they are very much, there is a collection of a dozen or so plants around the world that would be more or less considered master plants. And each one of them has a profound intelligence that's associated with it. So not to make it too simple of an analogy, but you have essentially like the Gandhi of plants, the Mother Teresa of plants, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And these conscious entities, since time immemorial, have co-evolved with cultures that have been in sacred reciprocity with them. Mm-hmm. So over time, the plants become more powerful because when we ingest the plant, the spirit of the plant understands what it's like to be a mammal, and we come to understand more what plant consciousness is like. So we in the context and the container of a sacred cultural milieu, we evolve. And so I often tell my students and apprentices that we have to be very careful because these medicines aren't just objects, just tools. And we have to walk very carefully in respect with them, just as if we were inviting a great master, a sadhu, into the lodge with us to help teach us and heal us. We have to treat it in much the same way. These are not objects.
Right.
And also that these medicines don't belong to us. There is a tremendous meme of ownership and objectivity, object ownership in Western culture, and as much as it may be hard to swallow me saying this, it's, I think, a very important consideration that these plants, these ancient spirits, are sentient, autonomous beings, and if you would have to attribute ownership to anyone, it's to the collective cultures that co-evolved with them and made these plants what they are, helped make these plants the powerful agents of transformation that they are now.
Right. And if you don't mind me interrupting here, I'm hearing what you're saying about the disassociation that many of us in the West have with consuming or utilizing anything as an inanimate object rather than seeing divine intelligence in everything that we find ourselves surrounded with, sharing, co-creative fields with, and certainly ingesting, that everything is sentient. And it is because we're so entrained to be dismissive, disassociative in this commodified world of assets and liabilities and substances that we kind of almost see again as unconscious and inert. So thank you for bringing our viewers back to the gentlest of reminders that it isn't always our fault that as we walk out in a given day and we step on, a budding mushroom or some fresh grass, it doesn't occur to us that we are actually interacting in any way, intelligently, consciously, or otherwise, but that we're always immersed in intelligence and that it is looking to participate and cooperate with us. And even more so when we're talking about expanding our consciousness and awareness by taking something that brings us to that next level of inclusiveness and really helping us have greater access to maybe a fourth, fifth dimensional self if you use those types of terms. So that is so pertinent and important. For our viewers, would you talk about what these primal plants, what their names and how they're associated? I've heard Terence McKenna talk a little bit about, the spirit of the mushroom, how that differentiates from the spirit of the vine of ayahuasca, and he's very humorous. You have your own terms. I would love to hear them if you could share those with us.
Well, sure. There are, the master plants, the plant teachers that I'm, most familiar with are tobacco and San Pedro. San Pedro is the South American cousin of the rather well-known visionary cactus that's found in Central and North America, peyote. And San Pedro is near and dear to my heart. We can't practice its use here because of legal reasons, so that's why I spend a lot of time in Peru. This plant in particular is extremely sacred and extremely important in the genesis of some of the highest, most advanced cultures in pre-Incan Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. But other sacred plants from that region, include the coca plant, Mama Coca. She is a repository of collective prayer within Andean cultures. There are, myriad visionary plants used for various purposes from the jungle. They typically, fall under a small number of plant families that do specific things to your physiology to allow non-ordinary states of consciousness to be attained. So, for instance, with with ayahuasca or yahe, what's very special about it physiologically is that the ayahuasca vine has chemical components in it that literally shut down a broad cross section of your liver's functioning.
Mm-hmm.
While the visionary component, the chakruna or the chalipunga, goes right to the brain and helps trigger the body's natural healing intelligence. The spirit of the plant then comes in and works with you under these altered conditions.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that we were excited to share with this resurgence of westernized curiosity around these plants, and maybe that in divine timing it's a coming of age, that they're going to become much more widely available. We've seen a lot of changes obviously in the United States. The voters have said we would like to see, for instance, medical marijuana and even recreational marijuana, the use of THC and CBD for pain control and inflammation, and so many other aspects of its application here in the United States. Perhaps we will also see psilocybin and ayahuasca, San Pedro, and some of these others becoming more popular. But from your wise and perched perspective, looking at the disconnection that we have here in our technologically crazed society that has become so disassociative, what do you think is the current theme or the yearning that is behind this recent resurgence of fascination and investigation into sacred plant medicine here?
Wow. So thank you. That's a great question. There's actually a lot to unpack within that. First, the resurgence of the use of psychotropic medicines, whether it be MDMA or psilocybin, in clinical research is promising and striking, to say the least. And this kind of work has actually been going on in a very carefully documented way in places like the Takawasi Center, outside of the United States for quite some time. It's extremely, extremely promising. So on the one hand, there are big swaths of medical need that remain unmet, and certainly a lot of these traditional medicines are being demonstrated very rigorously to address that need. That's one piece of it. But within our collective psyche, there is, I believe, a poverty, a hunger for connection, authentic connection that has been basically a hallmark of human existence since time immemorial, that one might argue a series of unintended consequences from social and technological revolution have deeply undermined. The shattering of the celestial spheres, the lack of a coherent cosmology to share a story of origin, present, and future. These things have left us deeply wounded in our psyches, and that wounding unresolved often translates to physical and mental illness if left unattended. Mm-hmm. These medicines are like a sacred mirror. They provide us with a very compassionate and truthful reflection of those deficits and imbalances. Mm-hmm. That said, I think that the way for the use of these sacred medicines, these sacraments, to achieve their highest potential in transforming what we see now in our culture to an awakened, aware culture that lives in balance with the earth and all living things, is that they should be part of a larger package of care, a larger system of care. The combination of the use of non-ordinary states of consciousness, whether induced by breath work or entheogens, along with especially body-centered psychological counseling, and some sort of longitudinal access to other means of sacred reflection is absolutely critical. One of the things that's happening a lot as the popularity of these medicines explode in America is that an ayahuasquero will come visit your town for a weekend, 30, 50, 70 people will experience tremendously transformational and sometimes very disruptive personal experience, and then they're left on their own. What do we do with this?
Right.
So providing a safe container and context that addresses both the Western mind as well as the deeper mythopoetic aspect of self that's so yearning to express itself and find authentic connection is, super, super important.
Yes. I mean, it's the difference that I'm hearing you say from a very intentional community culture that understands the holistic principle of being, our personal being and our connection in this divine web that, again, science continues to keep concurring with. My greatest delight is seeing esoteric, non-dogmatic, but esoteric principles that we can find, scriptural reference and deep philosophical reference, finding now greater agreement with evolving quantum physics and various scientific platforms. And that's really, in that breadth of that, we really are all connected. There is, whether it's you're talking about string theory or particle entanglement, I'm sure that these cultures that you worked with would have said, yeah, sure, of course, we know that everything's connected. Mother is connected if they use those terms, or, source is holding all of us, and we can visit our brothers and sisters on other, in other realms or in other dimensions. And that isn't even a question. So given this detachment that we have in our society and what you learned by being among them and feeling into the brotherhood that they provide you, how would we take what these indigenous cultures that you've learned from and merge them with our current culture that's eager to find connection? We're tired of feeling isolated. There is that yearning, and we don't just want it to be a one bang. You had a great, opportunity with a local shaman to do an ayahuasca gathering or a psilocybin party. How do we incorporate some of the aspects of their culture into ours to heal and become whole, Jeff?
Yeah, that is the question. Thank you. And I don't want to, make my reply to that sound too much like a sales pitch, but the organization that I co-founded with Ellen Kittredge, the Eagle Condor Council, some years ago, was propelled into being as a response to that very question. And our sort of hallmark program is a year-long immersive Andean mystery school, where we help provide, sometimes for the first time, a person's experience of what it is like to journey and go through and be held in a very well-tuned, very well-attended, impeccable, sacred community. And to learn sacred arts such as altarcraft and geomancy and shamanic flight, things like that were, basically the tool set underlying so many of the world's mystical traditions that through one tragedy or other have been sort of removed for myriad reasons. So what we've done is we've tried to create a coherent framework and community where people can be safely held and inspired to rewrite their story and come to a different, perhaps more healthy and more comprehensive understanding of themselves and their relationship to the cosmos. And it's not easy. It's disruptive. It's hard because we work with the shadow, but we're on our fifth round, and we're launching the school. We teach it in Asheville, North Carolina, but we're launching the school this next year in England. We have communities all over the United States where we're sort of carefully growing this program to. So essentially, that's been our response. And clearly, non-ordinary states of consciousness are important in this journey, because we view non-ordinary states of consciousness as just one of many means to understand universe in a more comprehensive and useful way, to draw in more useful information. I think about, there's a lot of kind of like bizarre and sideways understanding and interpretation of what shamanism means. I don't really even like using the term. I've never, for instance, referred to myself as a shaman. I don't even refer to myself as a healer. The role, and this is something that David Abrams in his incredible work, Spell of the Sensuous, maps out so elegantly, is that the primary role of the medicine-carrying elder in traditional culture worldwide isn't healing first and foremost. First and foremost, it is attending to the balance. Attending to the balance between the human order, which is tied up in the bardo of free will, and the rest of nature. Because when you're in balance, you don't get sick, your crops grow, you listen deeply and can anticipate what's happening in the natural world around you. It's only when you come to be out of balance that you lose your livestock and people go hungry and people get sick. So I think this is a very important distinction that needs to be made. Non-ordinary states of consciousness, shamanic consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is ritual consciousness, is all about bringing in more useful information so that you and your loved ones, your tribe, can walk in a more balanced way on the earth.
Right. Right. And I want to touch on what you mentioned with regards to non-ordinary states of consciousness. I think that that is a beautiful and really clean way to readdress this, because we do have a misuse of substances. I'm wanting to be impeccable and refer to these plant medicines as sacred medicines, and to touch on some of their faculties as psychedelics rather than hallucinogenics, or use the term drugs. We have such a way of breaking down and cheapening sacred things in the West, and it's because of this materialistic viewpoint that we've been entrenched in for quite some time. It's unfortunate. We kind of went from a polytheistic to a monotheistic to just kind of kicking out the whole baby, the bathwater, and you name it, and went into this materialistic view. And now we're having to come full circle and make some apologies and some humble announcements as we move back into this concept of there is a divinity or a source to everything that these indigenous people have never lost. But when we talk about young people that are yearning for it, and maybe they get a hold of some local mushrooms, that's easy to come by. And in many of the states, it's now even perfectly acceptable to get a hold of recreational marijuana. If you consider that there is a good high and a bad high, these are terms that are regularly used. Someone becomes more paranoid. Someone finds that they, are shrouded in a lot of feelings of darkness, and really just feeling maybe persecuted by things. The work that you're talking about doing with these people, with these indigenous cultures, is to understand the wholeness and the inclusiveness of not only our relationship with other sentient life around us, but the varying layers of relationship we have with ourselves. Like you said, the shadow work. If we go into one of these sacred ceremonies and not be fully conscious of its power, and we cheapen it down to, I'm going to get high and go off into a club with some friends, and it doesn't occur to us that the setting, the music, the vibration, the resonance, our own shadow that's lurching up, a bad high could be all about us really being out of resonance with ourselves. Wouldn't you agree, Jeff?
Well, goodness, yes. And it's, I'm the first to admit that I am a child of the 60s. I mean, I was born right in the middle of the whole flower power thing, and loved the music and loved so much that happened there. And at the same time, that whole beautiful blossoming of counterculture did quite a lot of harm to these ancient medicines through promoting casual and recreational use. It is extreme. It may be fun if you're lucky enough to have what you're considering a good high, but it is extraordinarily dangerous. You know,
Mm-hmm.
these are surgical tools that can access sometimes the deepest parts of our psyche and cause restructuring at a soul level. This
Mm-hmm.
is, you know, definitely nothing to play around with. And indeed, you know, the experience that you would consider negative or difficult is actually uh, the most, in the ceremonial context, in the healing context, is the most important one to help steward a person through, because it is said that these traditional medicines are extremely benevolent and they will not induce within you any experience or emotion that doesn't already exist there. They're
Mm.
sacred mirrors and amplifiers. So if you've got darkness, if you got problems with mommy and daddy, it is going to, you know, especially the stronger medicines like ayahuasca are going to amplify those hidden problems 10,000 times and allow you to feel every bit of it. Now, if you happen to be unlucky enough to be doing that while not being energetically and physically tended, it can be extraordinarily damaging.
Right.
Uh, this is why there's such the need for the sacred container and the learned, very, very well trained and well practiced facilitator who can both tend all the dimensions, all the issues that happen within the physical world, but also within the energetic realms as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and I'm sure because you've been so entrenched in this for so long and you have such a wide breadth of academic accomplishments, in your research, you probably were able to note at what point some of these plant medicines were available in the United States and certainly in the Western world. We know there are certain areas like Amsterdam and um, segments of the Western world where these are more widely available, and there are changes taking place here in the United States. But turning them into Schedule One drugs and having them be as prohibitive as they are, when there is so much good science, not only before they were restrictive, but also that's been going on either in the United States in a university setting or just outside the United States with these studies available. Why do you believe we've been so slow to re-embrace them in our culture when we have got such a crisis of pharmaceutical addiction and opioid addiction? What are your thoughts on that right now? What's the agenda behind that, and where do you see some changes coming along?
Well, it's a really good question. I'm
Mm.
not sure um, if there's a unified front. You know, if there's a, you know, a bunch of, you know, evil pharma giants saying, you know, no entheogens, you know, sort of behind um, the the golden halls of pharma, or the medical establishment. You know, we do know that non-ordinary states of consciousness are disruptive and can be quite a threat to established norms. I mean, that has been the case, and the you know, one of the primary reasons that these medicines are regarded as and controlled so tightly, because as soon as people wake up to their own divinity, their own nature, everything shifts. Everything has to shift, and often those shifts aren't necessarily in agreement with making citizens that feed the, you know, sort of consumerist supply chain culture that we have and all the beliefs that go along with it. I mean, these are
Right.
very disruptive, and it's and you see this, entheogen or not, you see this, um, how this sort of threat is dealt with around the world. It begs, you know, it begs a larger question. You know, certainly we see promising trends in terms of medical research and entheogens, but the way that the experiments are being conducted, the view of what the agents are, is still extremely primitive and extremely sterile and materialistic.
Mm-hmm.
My personal view, having been in healthcare a very long time is that we've gotten to a place in that institution, as well as many others in our good country, that we've just become non-optimizable. It's almost as everything has to collapse and be rebuilt. And the prayer is that there are a critical mass of people that are holding the vision for a really positive future that will help us navigate our way through the storm that's upon us now.
I'm feeling what you're talking about in terms of a massive societal wake-up call, particularly in the West, because it sounds like many Indigenous peoples have held on to their traditions and their secret history or sacred history, and certainly their shamanic rituals. But if that was to happen here, yes, we will not make for good sheep as an awakened society that isn't interested in acquisition and the constant pursuit of externalized things, because we have so much more opportunity to reflect on ourselves and the enoughness that's there. I know that when I've done interviews with others that have experimented, again, in the perfect and the most idyllic, I should say, I don't know if there is perfect, but certainly more ideal sets and settings with the right intention, they became aware of simple things, Jeff, like the fact that the potted plant that had been in the corner for 4 years was asking to please be repotted because it was feeling, too restricted by its roots. And there was this compassion that they felt for the plant that otherwise had just been a placeholder. It had just been something decorative and aesthetic. Sometimes people realized that a dog had been complaining for quite some time about pain and they just wanted to hold their animal. There is a compassion and a connection that takes place that removes us from seeing this mad chase, towards making the dollar, to acquire the status, to being perceived a certain way from an externalized view because our lens has been turned inward. Yeah. So I hear what you're saying, and it sounds beautiful, and it sounds like it should be attainable. Are you hopeful that with the trend towards North Carolina has experiments with legislation to be growing hemp crops here? It's right now for fiber. It isn't for the THC component, but it is for its many applicable uses, as well as CBD oil. And then, of course, with the most recent election, marijuana is growing and being utilized both medically and recreationally. What would we need to do as a culture to start to really deepen the appropriate uses and the care and the respect for these substances to welcome and usher in a new era of reintroducing these plants, not in a synthesized form? I'm not talking about having pharma take over and coming up with synthetics, but really keep and maintain the soul and that sentient consciousness of the plants themselves.
Well, that's a very good question, and I know that this is a question that's being asked by organizations like the International Ayahuasca Defense Fund. Organizations like MAPS that are really trying to create a base of learned credibility around parts of modern culture that use these medicines. So I am, in many ways, I take the sort of Churchill view that what did he say? Conditions have become so desperate that we have no other choice than to be optimistic. But seriously, I feel like I've got the best vocation in the world because I'm constantly in contact with people who are living incredibly awakened, very accountable, very compassion-filled lives. And I sometimes feel like we are really close to reaching a critical transformative mass of people that are living and believing this way. If I were to characterize one barrier between where we stand now and getting to a place where we are a much more healthy culture where, like you say, plants of use in non-ordinary states of consciousness and health are sacraments rather than objects, and that we all prosper in a way that is different than the current economical models. It would be that we really need to come to some sober reckoning, some collective storytelling and coming to truth around the specific events that have brought us unintentionally so far from seeing ourselves as part of the divine order of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as I said in the beginning, I think that it is none other than the unintended consequences of social and technical innovation that time and time again have displaced us from a living world of magic to a world of dead exploitable matter.
Yes.
Going back to Europe emerging out of the Middle Ages to the Copernican revolution, many to the quantum revolution, many brilliant exploits of the mind have had very dark underbellies in terms of tearing us apart in terms of our beings as embodied souls on this earth, as animals that belong to Pachamama, to the earth. So I believe it's so important for us to collectively start talking about this, telling these stories. This is stuff that you don't hear about in grade school and in your enculturation as a citizen of the planet. It's very important.
Can you touch on what the Sequoia did and in terms of nurturing their young at the time of, infancy and their evolution in adolescence to keep and maintain that understanding and that deep internal knowing about their connection? Did the plant medicine start soon? Was it through, music and storytelling? How did they maintain that intactness for their youth so that that was a continuation of the culture, Jeff?
Well, my exposure and experience to the Sequoia is actually you know quite eclipsed by my work with the indigenous cultures in the Andes, and I would probably say I can reference on more solid ground um, how they maintain their connection. Although I would say that there are common connections, and to put it in Western terms, it is an unwavering attention to gratitude practice, to
Wow.
acknowledging the beauty and the splendor of being able to witness um, the extraordinary beauty and miracle of life in the first place. The practice of sacred reciprocity, I think, is really key, and it's really where Western culture has probably gotten most out of balance.
Can you define that, Jeff? I don't mean to interrupt, but
Absolutely,
I really don't think that that can be missed.
absolutely, yes. Sacred reciprocity in the language of Quechua, it's Ayni, Ayni, and so essentially, it's a ritualized state of consciousness as well as a social ordering principle. So for everything that you receive in your life, either literally or symbolically, you give back.
Mm.
And it goes down to even casual encounters on the street in intact Andean mountain culture. The plant coca is used as a repository for prayers of sacred reciprocity. So one way to describe how this works on the social level is that when you most especially men in Indian culture carry bags that are about so big of coca leaves, and when they encounter someone on the street, the first thing they do is pull out a few leaves and blow a prayer of gratitude and intention for the good health and happiness of the person into the coca leaves, and the other person does the same, and you trade coca leaves. So over time, the the prayers are made flesh by the bundle containing the collective prayers of well-being that everyone in the community has for each other. And this is informed even by the structure of the language. You know, there's just certain ways that old language, especially the Quechua and derivative languages, work that don't separate self from other. They can't articulate the hard boundary between themselves and the rest of nature in the same way that we do. So in every dimension, you know, when you go to plow a field, you lay down prayers and offerings for the female and male spirits of the land. When you harvest, there are prayers and rituals that you do. And, you know, rather than being, you know, sort of artifacts of primitive culture, these prayers and these rituals have a very practical reason for being, is because they're constantly informing the individuals in the culture to be more self-aware, more aware of what's all around them, and the chain of causality, the effect that they're having on the environment. And when you move into a space like that, gratitude is at the heart. So people that practice like this, I find, are really the healthiest and happiest people that I've ever encountered. They're just absolutely amazing, and their children grow up in that field of being, that field of appreciation and practice of sacred reciprocity, the worldview that the stones are alive, the trees are alive, and that the spirits that inhabit plants are actually ancient teachers, and in many ways, if you're so chosen, those can become your teacher one day. It's a completely different cosmology. You know, 70% of the time when I'm with these people, they're taking care of one another. And we've gotten to the point in industrialized culture, I think the most recent death knell was really the unintended consequences of the New Deal, where the concept of the nuclear family and economic individualism took such fierce hold, telling us essentially that if we make enough money, we really don't need anybody else except our nuclear family. That is incredibly counter to how we've lived in so many ways on this earth since time immemorial. You know, it's hard for us to realize what a freak show that we live in right now in the industrialized culture. You don't really understand it until you live with cultures that haven't bought into all this.
Yes, I've heard those coming from a shamanic, or again, like you said, an indigenous healer's perspective, that the westernized world looks a lot like a disassociative schizophrenic. You know, we're just so compartmentalized, and we've compartmentalized our education, and we've compartmentalized our fact from fiction and our fantasy from reality. And what I'm hearing you say, and what we're, you know, having brought to our attention, is that we've lost a lot that didn't need to be cast out. You know, we very often in the westernized world raise our children to believe that there's a mysterious other realm that has elves and fairies, and that bring them money for their teeth, or a Santa Claus that comes down a chimney. And we've taught them about magic and the invisible realm. And it is actually now much more scientifically likely that we have these variant realms in multi-dimensional universes. And these indigenous people have never lost contact and understanding and obviously experience with it. But then we have raped or otherwise deprived our children of this belief and told them, no, that isn't true. You're all alone in this world. You know, you have to go through this entrainment that we call a public or a private education, and we're going to teach you that everything is compartmentalized and has rigid edges around it, and you're just going to, you know, be another human being hurtling through space on this rock that we're all on, not really knowing who you are or why you're here or what legacy you're leaving. And it leaves a wound, doesn't it, on our culture, Jeff? It leaves us kind of vacant, wondering what our purpose might be with so much disassociation.
Well, yeah, that is certainly true. We are in many ways the walking wounded. And at the same time, I would feel it a matter of arrogance or hubris to claim that I somehow know that we weren't supposed to do this. I think about my teacher, Beatrice Brutteau. One of her books is subtitled, well, it's called God's Ecstasy. I was the science editor on it, but the subtitle is The Creation of a Self-Creating Universe. And, if you look at our evolution from, say, the very broad perspective of the Vedas, or indeed some Eastern mystery schools, including Egyptian mystery schools, is that we are completing a very extreme point in a very long cycle where we have perhaps damaged ourselves through a necessary deep probing of the nature of the material world. I mean, we know so much more now about matter, and at all levels, from the subatomic all the way up to large systems, than we did a few hundred years ago. It's pretty startling.
Mm-hmm.
That has certainly had very negative effects in some ways. I mean, we're drunk with the power of technology. Was it not supposed to happen? Are we not supposed to be where we are at this moment? I can't claim to know.
Right. But we do recognize that we have, and at one point you did make available on your TED Talk some very pertinent data regarding percentages of mental health disorders and depression and addiction to various pharmaceuticals for mood imbalances. And you even went into, obesity and what is the yearning and the hunger to be trying to satiate self. What is actually missing there? So whether we were supposed to do it in some grand design, or whether we just happen to have become so encapsulated in our thinking that we've arrived here, it does appear that our society, our wounded society, is recognizing we don't have all the answers in material science. There is a calling and a resurgence towards investigating these psychedelics and sacred plant medicines, and also building community. And since we're getting close to the hour, I do not want our viewers to miss the opportunity to learn more about what you're doing in Asheville and outside of the United States. Let's talk a little bit about the education and the community that you're building again, so that we can get them as clear in being able to connect with you going forward, Jeff.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been a really lively conversation, Tatiana. So our organization is called the Eagle Condor Council. We are a group of right around 20 people who practice various styles of earth-centered spirituality. Our commonly held belief and motivation is that the earth can teach us quite a bit about how to move forward in a positive and balanced way, and that within the earth is divinity. We don't have to go out there someplace to understand the nature of God within.
Mm-hmm.
So we offer a number of different programs, seminars, workshops. Our anchor is the teachings of Pakokuna, the ancient medicine ways and cosmologies of the Andes, though we for instance, do have a Tibetan Buddhist collaborator, an African shaman collaborator. We collaborate in the spirit of the sort of reestablishment of the rainbow tribe. So please visit our site at eaglecondorcouncil.org. We have programs and events going on all over the U.S. and now a very strong presence in England. So we'd love to see you.
That is exciting. You can count on the fact that I'm going to be looking at your site and seeing where I can be making a trip up to the mountains from where we are currently airing in Raleigh, North Carolina, because there is no end to the depth and the richness and the texture that this imbues on our lives personally and every facet of our lives, to be inclusive in this type of community and this return to self. Jeff, thank you so much. It has been spectacular having you here tonight, educating our listeners. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Great spending the hour with you.
Yes, and we'll have to talk about having you back. And in the meantime, to our wonderful viewers, this is the quality that we're trying to bring you in terms of bringing you back to a holistic version of the universe, the world, yourself, and your connection to everything. It really isn't dualistic. If you are interested in supporting Solutionary TV, please go to our page, solutionarytv.com, be a patron, be a sponsor. We are thrilled to continue to bring you this quality content. And remember, together, we are the solution.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.